But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Daniel 1-8. Babylon, 605 BC. The greatest empire the world had ever seen had just crushed Jerusalem. The city of God lay in ruins. The temple, Solomon's magnificent temple, was ransacked, its sacred vessels stolen, and its walls demolished. And as the Babylonian army marched back to their capital, they brought with them the spoils of war, gold, silver, and something far more valuable people. But not just any people. King Nebuchadnezzar had given specific orders. He wanted the best and brightest of Jerusalem's youth, the cream of the crop. Young men of royal blood, physically flawless, intellectually brilliant, and quick learners who could be molded into Babylonian officials. The king's strategy was genius, really. Why destroy a conquered people when you could reprogram them? Take their princes, strip away their identity, immerse them in Babylonian culture, and in one generation they'd forget Jerusalem ever existed. Among these captives was a young man whose name meant, "God is my judge." That young man was Daniel, and he was about to face a test that would define not just his life, but his legacy for the next 70 years. Because what Nebuchadnezzar didn't realize was that he hadn't just captured any young Hebrew. He'd captured a man whose faithfulness would outlast empires, survive assassination plots, and shut the mouths of lions. This is the story of Daniel, the prophet of faithfulness. But before we dive into lions' dens and fiery furnaces, we need to understand what made Daniel different. Because the test of faithfulness doesn't begin in the dramatic moments. It begins in the small decisions that nobody's watching. When Daniel arrived in Babylon, he was immediately enrolled in a 3-year training program. Think of it as an ancient Ivy League education meeting cultural indoctrination. The curriculum included the language and literature of the Babylonians, which meant studying their gods, their magic, and their entire worldview. The program was designed to transform these Hebrew boys into Babylonian men. And it started with something simple: their names. Names in the ancient world weren't just labels. They were identity. They carried meaning, heritage, and destiny. Daniel's name literally meant, "God is my judge." His 3 friends had equally powerful names. Hananiah meant, "Yahweh is gracious." Mishael meant, "Who is what God is." And Azariah meant, "Yahweh has helped." Every time someone spoke their names, it was a declaration of faith in the God of Israel. So Babylon changed them. Daniel became Belteshazzar, meaning Bel protect his life, invoking a pagan god. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. New names, new identities. The message was clear. Forget who you were. Forget your God. You belong to Babylon now. But here's where it gets interesting. Daniel didn't fight the name change. He answered to Belteshazzar. He studied Babylonian literature. He learned their language, their customs, their ways. He became so fluent in Babylonian wisdom that he would eventually be placed in charge of all the wise men in the empire. Daniel understood something profound. You can engage with a culture without being consumed by it. You can live in Babylon without becoming Babylonian. But there was one line he wouldn't cross: the king's food. Now, this might seem like a strange place to draw the line. Of all the compromises Daniel could make, why refuse the royal menu? After all, eating the king's food was an honor. It was rich, luxurious, the finest cuisine in the known world. And Daniel had already accepted so much the new name the pagan education, service in a foreign court. Why make a fuss over food? Because Daniel understood something we often forget. Faithfulness isn't measured by the big, dramatic stands we take. It's built in the small, daily decisions when no one's looking. The king's food had likely been offered to Babylonian gods. To eat it would be to participate, even passively, in idol worship. It would defile him according to Jewish dietary laws. And more importantly, it would mean accepting provision from Babylon rather than trusting God's provision. This is where faithfulness begins, in the seemingly insignificant moments. Daniel resolved in his heart not to defile himself. Notice that phrase, resolved in his heart. He didn't wait until the food was placed before him to decide. He didn't wrestle with the decision in the moment. He had already settled the matter internally. His mind was made up. This is the secret to faithfulness. Decide your convictions before you face the test. But Daniel wasn't foolish. He didn't storm into the chief official's office making demands. He didn't throw the king's food on the floor in righteous indignation. Instead, he asked for permission. He was respectful, tactful, diplomatic. When the official expressed concern, reasonable concern, mind you, since failing to properly care for the king's trainees could cost him his head, Daniel proposed a test. 10 days, just vegetables and water. If they looked worse than the other young men, the official could do whatever he wanted. The result? After 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and better nourished than all the young men who ate the royal food. God honored their faithfulness in the small thing, and this pattern would repeat itself throughout Daniel's life. God showing up in miraculous ways when Daniel remained faithful in what seemed like small, insignificant matters. Fast forward 3 years. The training is complete. All the young men are brought before King Nebuchadnezzar for evaluation, and the king finds no one equal to Daniel and his 3 friends. They're 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the entire kingdom. Not because they were naturally smarter or more gifted, though they likely were, but because God gave them knowledge and understanding. The same God they refused to compromise for gave them success beyond measure. But Nebuchadnezzar was about to have a problem, and this problem would nearly destroy the kingdom. The king has a dream. Not just any dream, a terrifying nightmare that jolts him awake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. He knows it means something. He can feel it in his bones. So he does what any ancient king would do. He summons his wise men, his magicians, his astrologers, his sorcerers. These were the elite thinkers of Babylon, trained in the secret arts, the interpreters of omens and mysteries. But Nebuchadnezzar has a twist. He doesn't just want them to interpret the dream. He wants them to tell him what he dreamed. "Tell me the dream and its interpretation," he demands. "If you can't, I'll have you torn limb from limb and your houses destroyed." The wise men are stunned. "No king has ever asked such a thing," they protest. "What you ask is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they don't live among humans." The king is furious. This is the moment of truth. Either his wise men are legitimate or they're frauds who've been scamming him for years with vague predictions and convenient interpretations. He issues a decree. Kill all the wise men of Babylon, every single one, including Daniel and his friends. When the executioners come for Daniel, he does something remarkable. He asks, with wisdom and tact, why the decree is so urgent. Then he goes to the king and asks for time. Not much time. Just enough to seek God. He gathers his 3 friends, and they pray. Not a casual prayer. not a "if it's your will" kind of prayer. They petition God with desperation and urgency because their lives are literally on the line. And that night, God reveals the mystery to Daniel in a vision. Before Daniel runs to save his own neck, he does something that shows us his character. He praises God. Right there, knowing he could die at any moment, Daniel stops to worship. "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever," he declares. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. Daniel understood something profound. This wasn't about saving his life. This was about revealing God's glory in a pagan empire. This was about showing Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man in the world, that he wasn't really in control. That there was a God in heaven who sets up kings and brings them down. A God who knows the future and holds all power. When Daniel is brought before the king, he's careful to give credit where it's due. No wise man can explain the mystery the king has asked about. He says, "But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." Then Daniel tells the king his dream in vivid detail: a massive statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay, and a rock, cut out but not by human hands, that strikes the statue and becomes a mountain filling the whole earth. Nebuchadnezzar must have been speechless. This young Hebrew captive just described exactly what he saw. Daniel then explains the interpretation. The statue represents successive kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, flattering, but true. After him will come inferior kingdoms, then a divided kingdom. But ultimately, God will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, that will crush all other kingdoms and endure forever. The king's response is immediate. He falls prostrate before Daniel and honors him with gifts, high position, and authority. Daniel becomes ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief over all the wise men, from captive to prime minister, from exile to second in command. All because he remained faithful in the small things and trusted God in the impossible things. But this story isn't over. Because while Daniel's faithfulness earned him promotion, it also earned him enemies, and Nebuchadnezzar's pride was about to cause a major problem. Some time passes. Maybe the dream interpretation has faded from the king's memory, or maybe his ego can't handle the idea of inferior kingdoms following his reign. Because Nebuchadnezzar does something mind-boggling. He builds a golden statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. Not just the head is gold, the whole thing is gold. It's as if he's saying, "Daniel's interpretation was wrong. My kingdom will last forever. It's all gold, all the way down." He gathers all the important officials, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, everyone who matters in the empire. And he issues a decree. When the music plays, everyone must bow down and worship the image. Anyone who refuses will be thrown into a blazing furnace. Notice something important here. Daniel isn't mentioned in this story. He's likely away on official business, or perhaps his position was high enough that he was exempt from the ceremony. But his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are present. And they're about to face the ultimate test of faithfulness. The music plays. The horns, flutes, lyres, and all kinds of instruments fill the air, and everyone bows. Everyone except 3 young Hebrew men standing tall while thousands around them hit the ground. It's the most public act of defiance imaginable, and someone notices. Some jealous officials, likely resentful of these foreigners' rapid rise to power, rush to tell the king. "There are some Jews you've appointed over Babylon who pay no attention to you," they report. "They neither serve your gods nor worship the image you've set up." Nebuchadnezzar is furious. These are the same young men he honored, promoted, and trusted. How dare they defy him? He summons them and gives them one more chance. If you bow down, very good. But if you don't, you'll be thrown immediately into the furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Here it is, the moment of truth. Bow and live, stand and die. Most people would rationalize it. God knows my heart. It's just a gesture. It doesn't mean anything. I'll bow outwardly, but not worship inwardly. But these three young men have been training for this moment their entire lives, ever since they refused the king's food back in training. They've learned that faithfulness isn't situational. It's not something you turn on and off based on convenience or danger. Their response is legendary. King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up. Let that sink in. They don't presume to know what God will do. They don't claim he must save them, but they're absolutely certain of what they must do: remain faithful, regardless of the outcome. This is the essence of true faithfulness. Trusting God's character even when you can't see his plan, obeying him even when it might cost you everything. Nebuchadnezzar loses it. His face contorts with rage. He orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, so hot that it kills the soldiers who throw the 3 friends in. But then something impossible happens. The king leaps to his feet in amazement. "Weren't there 3 men we tied up and threw into the fire?" he asks his advisors. "Yes, your majesty," they reply. "Look," the king says. "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." This is one of the most profound moments in Scripture. When you're faithful to God, even in the fire, you're never alone. The presence of God meets you in your trial, not always before it, not always around it, but right in the middle of it. The furnace that was meant to destroy them became the place where God's glory was most visible. When they emerge, not even a hair is singed. Their robes aren't scorched. They don't even smell like smoke. And Nebuchadnezzar issues a new decree. Anyone who speaks against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be destroyed. Then he promotes them again. Their faithfulness in refusing to compromise led to greater influence, not less. The years pass. Nebuchadnezzar dies. His successors rule briefly and ineffectively. Then comes Belshazzar, the final king of Babylon. And one night, during a great feast where he's drinking from the sacred vessels stolen from Jerusalem's temple vessels dedicated to God, something terrifying happens. A hand appears and writes on the wall, "Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin." The party stops cold. The king turns pale. His legs buckle. He summons all his wise men, but no one can read the writing or explain its meaning. Finally, the queen, likely the queen mother who remembers the old days, suggests calling Daniel. "There's a man in your kingdom," she says, "who has the spirit of the holy gods. He has insight, intelligence, and wisdom like the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians." Daniel is brought in. By this point, he's an old man. He's served in Babylon for decades, through multiple regime changes, always faithful, always wise. Belshazzar offers him rewards, purple robes, gold chains, and the third highest position in the kingdom. Daniel's response is classic. You can keep your gifts, but I'll read the writing for you anyway. Then Daniel does something gutsy. Before interpreting the message, he preaches. He reminds Belshazzar how God humbled his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, how pride brought him down, and how he learned that the Most High God is sovereign. But you, Daniel says, pointing at the king, you knew all this, yet you didn't humble yourself. You set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You praised gods of silver and gold, but you didn't honor the God who holds your very breath in his hand. Then comes the interpretation. Mene means God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel means you've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin means your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, Belshazzar is killed. The Babylonian Empire falls, the Medo-Persian Empire rises, and Daniel, he's still standing, still faithful, still relevant. Because empires rise and fall, but faithfulness to God outlasts them all. But Daniel's greatest test is yet to come. Under the new Persian administration, King Darius appoints Daniel as one of 3 administrators over the kingdom. And Daniel so distinguishes himself that the king plans to set him over the whole kingdom. The other officials are jealous. They know Daniel's reputation for integrity. So they look for grounds to bring charges against him in his conduct of government affairs. They find nothing. No corruption, no negligence, no dirt. Their conclusion is telling. We'll never find any basis for charges against this man unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Think about that. Daniel's enemies knew his only vulnerability was his faithfulness to God. Not ambition, not greed, not scandal. His relationship with God was the only thing they could exploit. So they scheme. They approach King Darius with a proposal. Issue a decree that for 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human except the king shall be thrown into the lion's den. The king, flattered by the idea of being the sole object of worship, signs the decree into law which, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, cannot be repealed. When Daniel learns about the decree, here's what he does. He goes home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. And 3 times a day, just as he had always done, he kneels down and prays, giving thanks to his God. Not in secret, not hidden away. He prays exactly as he always had, windows open, visible to anyone watching. This is faithfulness at its finest. Daniel doesn't make a show of his prayer to prove a point. He doesn't hide his prayer to save his skin. He simply continues his practice of seeking God 3 times daily, just as he had for decades. Consistency in devotion, regardless of consequences. The officials catch him, just as they knew they would. They report to the king, who is devastated. He spends the entire day trying to find a way to save Daniel, but the law cannot be changed. At sunset, Daniel is thrown into the den of lions. The king says to him, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Then a stone is placed over the mouth of the den, sealed with the royal signet, and Daniel is left alone with the lions. The king can't sleep. He fasts through the night. At the first light of dawn, he rushes to the den and calls out in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" And from the darkness comes a voice, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They haven't hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king is overjoyed. Daniel is lifted from the den, not a scratch on him. Then Darius does what Nebuchadnezzar did before him. He issues a decree that in every part of his kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God. The decree reads, "And he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth." Daniel's faithfulness didn't just save his own life. It became a testimony that changed the hearts of emperors and altered the spiritual landscape of empires. This is what happens when you refuse to compromise. Your life becomes a living sermon that no one can refute. But there's more to Daniel than surviving trials. He was also a prophet who received visions of the future that remain relevant today. His prophecies about successive kingdoms, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, were fulfilled with stunning accuracy. His vision of the 70 weeks provided the timeline for the coming of the Messiah. His apocalyptic visions in the later chapters influenced Jesus' own teaching about the end times and shaped the book of Revelation. Daniel lived to see the fall of Babylon and the decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem, though he himself likely never went back. He spent his entire adult life, over 70 years in exile, serving pagan empires, yet never losing his identity as a servant of the living God. He prayed 3 times daily, facing Jerusalem, holding on to the promise of restoration even when it seemed impossible. So, what made Daniel different? Why did his faithfulness stand out among so many who compromised? First, Daniel decided his convictions before facing the tests. When the king's food was offered, he had already resolved not to defile himself. When everyone else bowed to the statue, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't need to deliberate. They'd settled the matter long before. When prayer became illegal, Daniel didn't change his routine because his routine had been established over decades. Faithfulness is built in the quiet, daily decisions long before the dramatic moments arrive. Second, Daniel understood that you can engage culture without being compromised by it. He learned Babylonian wisdom, served in pagan governments, advised ungodly kings, but he never worshipped their gods or adopted their values. He was in Babylon, but not of Babylon. He proved you can be culturally intelligent without being spiritually compromised. Third, Daniel was faithful in the small things, which prepared him for the big things. Refusing the king's food seemed insignificant at the time, but it established a pattern of obedience that would sustain him through fiery furnaces and lions' dens. If you can't be faithful when nobody's watching, you won't be faithful when everyone is. Fourth, Daniel's faithfulness wasn't rooted in what God would do for him, but in who God was. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "But even if he doesn't," they revealed the secret to unshakable faith. They trusted God's character, not his protection. They were committed to obedience, regardless of outcomes. Fifth, Daniel maintained his spiritual disciplines consistently. 3 times a day, every day, for decades, he prayed facing Jerusalem. Not when he felt like it, not when it was convenient, not when it was safe. He maintained a rhythm of seeking God that sustained him through every trial and transition. His prayer life wasn't a response to crisis, it was the foundation that prepared him for crisis. The result of Daniel's faithfulness? He outlasted empires. He influenced emperors. He prophesied the future. He became a living testimony to the faithfulness of God across generations. His name became synonymous with integrity, wisdom, and unwavering devotion to God. And his story continues to inspire millions to remain faithful even when everything is on the line. But here's the challenging question. What tables would God need to flip in your life? What compromises have you made that seem small, but are slowly eroding your faithfulness? Where have you decided that blending in is safer than standing out? Daniel's story confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Real faithfulness costs something. It cost Daniel the comfort of his homeland. It cost Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego the security of conformity. It nearly cost all of them their lives multiple times. But what they gained was immeasurably greater. They gained the presence of God in the fire, the protection of God in the den, and the testimony of God that changed empires. The same choice stands before us today. Will we resolve, like Daniel, not to defile ourselves with what the world offers, even when it costs us position, comfort, or popularity? Will we maintain our spiritual disciplines consistently, even when no one's watching? Will we be faithful in the small things, knowing they prepare us for the big things? Because here's the beautiful truth. When you're faithful to God, you're never alone. The fourth man in the fire is still showing up in our furnaces today. The God who shut the mouths of lions is still protecting his faithful servants. The one who gave Daniel wisdom to interpret dreams is still revealing mysteries to those who seek him. Daniel's story isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint for living faithfully in a hostile world. It's proof that you can have influence without compromise, success without corruption, and power without pride. It's evidence that one life of unwavering faithfulness can impact generations and glorify God across empires. The question is, will you be that kind of faithful? Will you resolve in your heart, right now, before the test comes, that you will not defile yourself no matter the cost? Will you maintain your disciplines, engage your culture wisely, and trust God's character even when you can't see His plan? Because the world doesn't need more people who know about Daniel. It needs more Daniels. People who pray when prayer is unpopular. People who stand when everyone else bows. People who trust God in the fire and the den and the palace and the exile. People whose lives become testimonies that no one can refute and emperors can't ignore. Daniel proved that faithfulness isn't just about surviving trials, it's about bringing glory to God through them. It's about showing a watching world that there is a God in heaven who is worthy of our complete devotion, even when it costs us everything, especially when it costs us everything. So here's the real question. When your moment comes when you're asked to bow or compromise or hide your faith, will you be ready? Will your answer be, like Daniel's friends, we don't need to defend ourselves in this matter? Will your life demonstrate that you've already decided, long before the test, that God is worthy of your faithfulness no matter what? The same God who was with Daniel in Babylon, with his friends in the furnace, and with him in the lion's den, is with you right now. He's calling you to the same kind of radical, costly, beautiful faithfulness that made Daniel's life a beacon across empires and centuries. The only question is, will you answer that call? Because in the end, empires fall. Kingdoms rise and crumble, lions grow old and die, furnaces go cold. But faithfulness to God that outlasts it all, that changes everything. And that's the legacy of Daniel, the prophet of faithfulness.